Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 233, and we're going to talk about a spontaneous market in my son's middle school. I'm not going to mention any names or places. Yeah, here we go. So, in my son's school, there's a science teacher who awards or rewards students with science dollars. So if they participate in class, they answer questions correctly, and probably if they perform other positive acts of behavior, they are rewarded with a science dollar. Then at the end of the week, they can spend the science dollars that they have at the store, which is basically a part of the teacher's classroom where she has candy mostly. Nothing is really too expensive, just like one or two science dollars to buy like a Jolly Rancher or something like that. And I asked if there were other uses for these science dollars, and he said that you can use science dollars to be excused to go to your locker. They can be used to get an extension for homework. And most likely there are other classroom related uses, right? So whenever it comes up, people might say, "Oh, I'll do it for a couple of science dollars, or can I do it if I give you a couple science dollars?" And so there's that interaction with the teacher, right? And so there's the use there. There are also penalties that can be assessed. We'll call them fines. Um, Right. So if bad behavior, then you have to pay a fine in science dollars. If you don't have your homework, perhaps you have to pay in science dollars. And if you don't have science dollars, maybe you have to go into debt. But eventually, I guess everything kind of breaks even because the teacher is, it seems, pretty generous with the science dollars. Um, so I asked about counterfeiting, and because they're in 10th grade, they can think to that level. And he said, no, no, the teacher makes them herself. And so, because I guess there's her mark or her writing, which ensures authenticity, that it's not counterfeit. Now, interestingly, a small economy has formed beyond the initial intended use of these science dollars. So people save their science dollars and use them for other goods, for other things. So let's just say in that science class you forgot to do your homework, then you pay 10 science dollars to copy someone else's homework. And I was thinking about that. What if it's cheaper to get an extension on your homework than copying someone's homework? But then I think the idea is that the person can't do the homework, and that's why he's copying it for 10 science dollars. They can use the science dollars to buy other people's snacks from other people's lunches, right? So, and this is certainly not science class, but let's say science class is over, you go to lunch, and in my son's case, he packs, high chews, which are a Korean snack, very sugary but very tasty. And apparently, certain flavors are very desirable from other middle schoolers. And so, if he shows a high chew, then other people start bidding for the high chew, right? He did say that sometimes if multiple people want the one high chew, then there's a bidding process, right? And so normally it's just one or two science dollars, although he did intimate that it's always at least two science dollars. But if there's a bidding war, it could go higher. Uh, People also probably use science dollars to buy other people's snacks, maybe some food, if they don't have actual money to buy from the cafeteria. Science dollars are also used to buy utensils, pencils, other things that you need for class. And then I asked him if people sometimes use their science dollars to copy other people's homework in other people's classes, right? So let's say in their math class, does someone pull out some science dollars and try to copy someone else's math homework or English homework? And he said, I suppose it is possible. All right. So, you have this little mini economy going on. He doesn't spend, which is weird, right? So he's got 30 science dollars sitting in his bag, but I don't know. Anyway, so it's kind of satisfies um, the role of currency, right? There's a limited supply. You can only get them produced if people are doing positive things, right? And they are used, right? So they are consumed. Uh, they hold value as long as the school year people are in session. I suppose that it's possible that next year the same teacher, I mean, obviously, if they don't have the same teacher, then they won't be able to have access to more science dollars. Although, if the same teacher continues to use science dollars next year, then anything that he saves this year, he could potentially use next year with the new science students, right? So it holds value as long as that teacher is still there with her in-class store, right? And also the other uses that that teacher will accept science dollars for. So it's kind of a unit of account too, right? Science dollars can be used to calculate the going prices of things, right? How much to copy your homework, how much for that piece of candy, that kind of thing. And so science dollars, at least within the school, determines the value of the various things that students want from other students. Now, I did mention they are consumed, and so one might wonder, does that mean it has a use case? But not really, right? You can't eat the science dollars, right? It's the same problem as the fiat dollars that we use in the real world, right? You can't eat them, you can't live in them, you can't really use them for much of anything else. But for now, in that school, production is limited, so we don't have the same problems of inflation that we currently have with the US dollar. So I'm beginning to make that transition into the real world that people in the real world, outside of school, in adult world, we see that uh, people seek out those things which have value. Goods were used as money, and better money takes the place of earlier iterations of money because their form, their use, their ease of transport, their durability, those kinds of aspects, and their use case is better, right? So if you look in biblical times, a person's wealth is measured by how many camels he might have. But of course, camels have a lifespan, so that wealth is sort of not stable, right? If a bunch of your camels die in a sandstorm, I guess all of a sudden we have a problem. Also, if they die of old age, that's a problem. Perhaps if a camel that is in its prime may have more value than a camel that is older. I don't know. I don't have any camels, but so wealth used to be measured that way, but I mean, where are you going to put 1,000 camels, right? So you're going to look for um, a better commodity to serve the function of money, right? And this argument was presented in the Mises Institute's book, "What Has Government Done to Our Money?" I think it's Murray Rothbard who wrote that. And eventually one day I am probably in the summer or one of the vacations, I am going to do a little highlight video on that book as well as Mussolini's article on fascism. But yeah, I just don't have time right now. But if something is regarded and is accepted and it has the same use, then it will take the place of the earlier form of money. And so eventually people settled on gold and silver, right? In the early America, people settled on tobacco, but of course there were problems with the tobacco. I won't get into it. But eventually people got around to gold and silver. But when paper dollars appeared and they said it was basically what is it? A promissory note, right? So if you took your dollars and went to a bank, you can exchange it for gold and silver. But that process was pretty gradual, right? Replacing gold and silver with paper. It happened in increments, right? FDR did, confiscated gold in the 1930s, and then Nixon took us off the gold standard in the 1971. And right, so it's this gradual, moving people away from commodities and just simply using fiat. So if we were to compare this to the science dollars, uh, I guess back in 1933, that's when science dollars would be kind of like that, right? Inflation is not so bad. Production of dollars is not that great. And the use of the dollars is, you can buy a lot of stuff with it still. So some people, or most people don't really notice that the paper is just simply paper, that in and of itself, it has no value. Like I would hear this a lot when I was a lot younger, like probably coming out of high school, people would talk about, yeah, people would talk about inflation and how it's just paper. And I couldn't really understand what they were saying because I could take this paper and buy stuff with it. So what do you mean it has no value? That it's just fiat? I don't get it, right? And so a lot of people who are not taught, what money actually is and why it is money, that there is an end use, there is a use case, then it becomes kind of difficult to get your head around an Austrian understanding of money. But eventually people, some people know this whole time, right? Obviously, people like hard money people, they know what's going on. People like Ron Paul. And so he's been warning people for decades. But eventually people kind of figure it out, right? When your purchasing power evaporates because of inflation, more and more inflation, more and more government spending, as people these days are referring to inflation, people begin to notice they can't buy as much at the grocery store. Trips to the grocery store are much more expensive than they were before, even though you're buying the same things. And then you also notice the shrinkflation, how you spent the same amount of money, but the products you're buying are smaller. People think that you're getting ripped off. And I always wondered about that. Why is it that, the candy that I used to buy for $1 is suddenly still $1, but a lot smaller? Like, why are they doing that? Maybe because they're greedy, right? Because people just don't understand what inflation is and what it does to the purchasing power of the money that they're using. But also the manufacturers of the candy also have to deal with inflation. They have to pay their workers more. The cost of the goods that they're using, to the ingredients of the goods that they're producing, those prices are going up. So how do you, prevent this sticker shock of raising your prices very, very high in order to produce the same exact product, right? And so that's why you have shrinkflation, right? People are trying to keep the same price, but how are they going to do it? Well, you have to put less product in each package, right? And so that's how they're going to be able to still make a little money, and customers are going to complain, but at least they're not spending more, right? So it's that kind of weird psychological thing. Uh, Eventually people figure it out and then the currency collapses. I did a little Googling and it turns out there are a lot of currencies that have crashed. We only know of a handful, perhaps like Germany, right just before World War II. I knew that Korean currency had several hyperinflationary periods, which is why their 10,000 won note is what is it? Uh, oh, it's like $20, $10, $20, right? So it's just kind of funny. So they're in the thousands and we're still in the single digits. So it's kind of interesting. Um, so I did a little searching and there are lots of different articles, and depending on the time frame, it'll tell you how many fiat currencies have been abused and therefore collapsed and are no longer in existence. There's one article that was on Reddit. The guy mentioned there were 152 currencies in the last, call it a hundred, 100, 200 years or something like that. And the average lifespan was 24.6 years, right? So a fiat currency, their average lifespan is 25 years. And then people figure out that, oh, they are inflating their currency, they're stealing from us. The paper that they're giving us and that's circulating, they're not worth that much. And so the currency collapses, right? When people realize that the money that they're holding is losing value by the second, then they're spending it, unloading it as fast as they can. So the 1992 Mexican silver peso lasted 170 years before it collapsed. The 2005 Turkish lira lasted 83 years when it collapsed in 2005. The Argentina, some of these countries made the list several times, right? Because like for example, 1970 Argentina, their currency that lasted for 71 years collapsed. And then a couple of years later, their next new currency collapsed, et cetera, et cetera. And so the German mark failed in 1924. Again, it failed in 1948. They had multiple failures, right? And then if you go down the list, you can see a whole lot of continental shillings, American fiat, early colonial American fiat. Uh, they would print them out and then they would collapse. And some of the currencies on the list of 152 only lasted 3 months, right? So the government would say, okay, here's the new currency. And 3 months later, it's unworkable, right? It's worth nothing. And so the currency, the level of confidence in a currency is telling, right? The more confidence there is in the currency, the longer it will last. Obviously, the dollar is, the trust in the dollar is eroding very, very quickly thanks to the U.S. government. So the United States is on the same road as all of these other 152 currencies, right? In other words, we're inching closer and closer to out of control inflation. And the reason is because there are so many threats to the dollar. Not only is our government inflating so much, but there are threats to the dollar, right? So if none of these other threats existed, I guess they could carry on this the dollar for a little bit longer. But you got the BRICS Bank. I've talked about it recently. Uh, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and then you have all their new members as well who are trying to de-dollarize or move away from the dollar or be able to have international transactions without using the dollar. You got Saudi Arabia accepting other people's fiat currency as a form of payment instead of the US dollar. And I believe that maybe with Russia or China, they're accepting gold, but I think it's more they're just accepting other people's national currency and then taking that currency and doing what most people do. They either buy stuff from that country or they invest in the companies of that country, right? Otherwise, how are you going to unload the currency from that country? Also, another threat for the United States is the interest on borrowing that the United States has done, right? So when they borrowed money, it was at a certain interest rate. But as you all know, ever since Trump took office till now, or I think while Trump was in office, right? Int were they doing that? They were cutting perhaps, but recently they were raising interest rates to the point where people started depositing in the bank again because you finally got 5% or 4% yield on a CD or a savings bond. But the problem is when the interest rates came up, than the value of savings bonds that people already bought like 10, 20 years ago. Yeah, the value of those bonds, tanked, right? So, how's that work? As the interest rate goes up, the value of the treasuries go down, right? Uh, and so that's the problem is that all these banks and all these entities that have a lot of treasuries on their balance sheet, yeah, that debt is now toxic, right? In other words, you might think that you have $100 million in treasuries, but the purchasing power of those treasuries are like $50 million, not $100 million, right? And so the value of the bonds determine the assets or how much money that banks could lend out, perhaps. But imagine people showing up and saying, "Hey, I want my money." And so you sell your treasuries to try to give them money, but the problem is that the treasuries are only worth half as much as when you first bought it. Okay. And so when that happens, they have to liquidate even more just to make it up to that person. But then where are all the treasures for everyone else's withdrawal? And you have this huge problem. And so you have bank collapsing because of that. There's also the yen carry trade, the Japanese yen carry trade, because there is a small interest difference between the yen and the dollar. The yen and pretty much a lot of other currencies, people would, borrow yen, then use the yen to buy things, right? But because there was an arbitrage there was a difference in the interest, and so they were able to try to swing that, borrow lots of yen, but then flip the yen for another currency, making a small profit. But of course, the problem is that when you unwind it all, when you start paying everyone back, uh, you know, there's going to be a crash, right? So the more you pay back, the more the yen, uh, I believe, uh, decreases in value or increases in value, which therefore ruins the arbitrage, and therefore people can't make that trade any longer. And so people just start returning or cashing out their treasuries, which pushes the yen up even more, which causes people to want to cash out more, et cetera, et cetera. And so the yen carry trade can no longer happen, and that'll result into a systemic crash. At least some people say that's one possibility. Now, so there are lots of different things, scenarios that could happen. We've talked about commercial real estate problem. We've talked about repo crisis, although I can't really explain what that is. But just know that it is a serious problem for US banks. The upside is that hopefully, if all of this is revealed, corruption in government is curtailed, right? Is reduced, at least reduced a little, right? And so all these people who are hiding all of their toxic debt, right? Treasuries that no longer are worth their face value, uh, then when everything goes sideways in the United States, everyone who's holding on to fake wealth, things that have no value, so fake value, that'll all be revealed. And to put it into layman's terms, a lot of people will suddenly realize that they have no savings or very little savings after they thought they had a tremendous amount of savings. And if that does happen, then we have to go back to a period of time where people have to have good relationships with each other. You just can't run up to random strangers and start yelling in their face, right? That might be the person who's selling you the food that you needed. And so now you have to be more polite. You have to be more cordial. You have to not jump to conclusions. And this promotes peace. This promotes more cooperation and tolerance. And also, hopefully, it will lead people back to honest money, hard money, money that's real, that cannot be inflated at the whim of a politician. But anyway, that's the hope. And hopefully, in that process, people will rediscover what it is to live in a peaceful and prosperous society. So that's it for this episode. I will talk to you next time.